Today we got some more actual history in our series Lost Gold on Unworthy History. This story is about a search for a gold mine near Eagle, Colorado that has led to the death of everyone who is supposed to have found it. We'll be reading from the January 1963 issue of Frontier Times magazine. The story we'll be reading is called Treasure in Bowman Gulch, written by Ray Dorr, who lived from 1928 to 2016. This story begins with Ray traveling to a small town near the site of Bowman Gulch to interview one of his old friends, whose uncle was one of the men who have died while searching for this mine. What do you think of lost gold mines? Do stories of them excite your imagination, make you want to throw your pistol and your shovel in your car and head for the wilds and riches? If they do, then you are an average red-blooded American male who yearns for adventure and excitement in this age of canned entertainment, push-button gear shifts, and weekends at the seashore with the kiddies. But why don't you go looking for a lost mine? Simple. Most lost gold mine stories are filled with directions so vague and inaccurate you wouldn't be within 10 miles of a treasure if it existed at all. Would you risk your time and possibly your life to find a rich vein of gold ore if someone could pinpoint the exact location of a canyon less than a mile long and a quarter of a mile wide? Several authorities claim it contains one of the richest, if not the richest, veins of gold ore ever discovered in Colorado. This canyon is the hiding place for a cache of gold nuggets estimated to be worth between $60,000 and $100,000. To guard this fabulous treasure are the skeletons of at least 5 men, plus the ghost of a sixth, whose body was removed from the canyon by a group of men whose respect for their friend overcame their fear. The story of the Lost Slate Mine took me to a tar paper shack at the abandoned Lady Bell Silver Mine a few miles out of Eagle, Colorado. I smiled when I saw the battered Jeep beside the shack, because it meant that my old friend Bill Kleckner, a 70-year-old prospector and miner, was home. As I pulled to a stop in front of the shack, a man appeared in the doorway. He was wearing blue denim bib overalls and a battered felt hat, a pipe nestled in the groove it had worn in his teeth. "Hi, Bill," I called. "Why, Ray, by golly, it's good to see you. Come on in." "How's everything going up on Horse Mountain these days?" I asked. Bill has spent the last 20 years of his life drilling a tunnel into the mountain looking for a silver lode that escaped the earlier miners in the Lady Bell mine. "Well, that big outfit from Grand Junction took a lease on my place. Going to bring in a drilling outfit next week. I bet you they find something big this time," he answered. We went into the one-room shack and sat down in a couple of old straight chairs. The room was roughly furnished with a bed, coal-cook stove, table, and 2 chairs. On the wall hung a rifle and a fly fishing outfit. A shelf was piled with magazines and a collection of ore samples. For all its crude furnishings, the cabin was clean and had a comfortable man's feeling. "Bill, you were born and raised in Eagle County. What do you know about the Lost Slate Mine?" "Lost Slate Mine? I don't believe I ever heard of it, Ray." "Wasn't Arthur Fulford your uncle?" I asked. "Yes, Uncle Art was killed in a snowslide the year I was born," he said. "That's the one, Bill. I have been doing some research for a story about the Lost Slate Mine. That's where I ran across your uncle's name. Let me tell you what I have found. Then I want to hear what you know about the mine." In 1848, a group of men heading for the big gold rush in California apparently got lost in the high country west of the Mount of the Holy Cross. Quite by accident, they stumbled onto an outcrop of rich gold ore. In 1848, this was mighty wild country, a long way from any trading posts, so most of the men decided to continue on to California, but 6 men remained behind to work the outcrop. They built a cabin and mined between $60,000 and $100,000 worth of gold before winter set in. According to the information I find, the mine was just below the timberline. Bill nodded his head. "Uncle Art was killed just below the timberline," he said. I continued. "One of the party, a man named Buck Jones, took a pouch full of the gold and returned to a trading post for supplies. That was probably Bent's Fort on the Arkansas River, or one of the little trading posts on the Platte River near the present location of Denver. It was a rough trip traveling back across the mountains by himself, the weather turning colder every day. By the time he reached the trading post, he was ready to recuperate with a jug. The more he thought about the trip back, the more he turned to the jug for consolation. Finally, after several weeks had passed, his conscience got the best of him, and he headed back to Slate Mountain with several pack horses loaded with supplies. Instead of a cabin filled with smoke curling out of the chimney and wood stacked by the door, Jones, as he waded through the snow to the top of the rise overlooking the claim, saw only a blank expanse of rock. It appeared as if a giant hand had swept down the face of the canyon and pushed everything into a jumbled mass on the narrow canyon floor. The shock of this discovery affected Buck Jones's mind. He wandered to the trading post, then drifted up to the mountain mining camps in the Colorado Rockies. He spent the rest of his life bumming drinks in one saloon or another, telling the story of the lost slate mine, and blaming himself for the death of his comrades. Many prospectors who heard Jones's story went looking for the lost mine. At least one of them found it. One day in the 1880s, a prospector got drunk in a saloon in Denver and sobbed that he had killed his partner in an argument over dividing the take from the lost slate. He had a bag full of gold nuggets to substantiate his story. In his drunken state, he gave the bartender directions for finding the mine. Then he disappeared. These are the directions he gave the bartender. Go down the Eagle River to Brush Creek, the present site of the town of Eagle. Follow the creek 5 miles to the forks. The distance between the Eagle River and the forks is actually about 15 miles. Follow the east branch about 5 miles until you come to a shift of rocks, coming almost to the water's edge. Follow a dry gulch running north until you find 4 large trees standing close together, with all of the bark taken off. At this point, turn due east and go directly up the hill until you come to a small hole dug in the ground. Continue until you come to another hole, and so on until you come to a third hole. This line is also marked by blazed trees on both sides. From the third hole, turn due north, and about 200 feet from the last blazed tree, you will see 3 tall trees standing in a triangle. The trees have their tops broken off about 30 feet up, possibly from a snowslide. This is about 300 feet from the timberline. The vein runs north and south of this point. A few years later, an old prospector asked Arthur Fulford, then living at Red Cliff, to help him bring some ore out of the mountains from the Lost State mine. Fulford agreed, but the old prospector was killed in a barroom brawl before he could return to the mine with Fulford. Fulford found a map in the old man's pack and headed for the high mountains immediately. When he did not return to town in a few days, a search party went out looking for him. They found him buried in a snowslide. It appears that your uncle was the last man to know the exact location of the lost mine, until about 10 years ago. A deer hunter picked up an odd-colored rock while hunting. He had the sample assayed and found that it contained an extremely high percentage of gold. The hunter would only say that he found the sample near the timberline, in the upper Brush Creek area. He planned to return when the snow melted in the spring and stake out a claim, but he died of a heart attack during the winter. Well, Bill, that's the information I have dug up about the Lost Slate mine. Like most lost mine stories, the information is vague and inaccurate. Even the bartender's directions don't coincide with the actual lay of the land. During the time I was talking, Bill had lighted his pipe at least 6 times. Once again, he dug into a pocket, pulled out a match, and struck it. He held the match to the pipe, puffed, then drew his hand away but held on to the burning splinter. I watched in fascination as the flame drew closer and closer to his fingers. By golly, Ray, I never did hear that story about Uncle Art's death, but I know right where that mine is supposed to be. You do? At the last instant, Bill whipped the flame out and threw the burnt match in a coal bucket. To start at the beginning, he said, Uncle Art lived up in Red Cliff, about 30 miles up Eagle River from here. He struck it rich in those cliffs where the town of Gilman is now. Then he moved over to Fulford at the head of East Brush Creek. I guess the town was named after him. Uncle Art had 3 or 4 claims there, but I don't think they amounted to anything. Anyway, he went to Red Cliff when he heard about the 2 fellows striking it rich on New York Mountain. Those 2 fellows had disappeared suddenly. Nobody knows who they were or why they disappeared, but since they weren't around to refile their claim, it was open to reclaiming after midnight on the 1st of January. That's why Uncle Art was up on that mountain on the night of December 31st. Nobody in his right mind would go up in that country that time of year, unless he knew for sure there was a rich outcrop up there and wanted to be the first to claim it. Man, the snow gets deeper than this house up there. Well, Uncle Art didn't show up, so some of his friends from Red Cliff followed his snowshoe tracks into Bowman Gulch, up on New York Mountain. The tracks went right to the edge of a slide, then stopped. The fellows spread out and started to look for his body. Believe me, it took guts to go down in that canyon, when another slide could have covered the whole bunch of them. Finally, a fellow named George Boland found a hand sticking up the snow. The men dug down and found Uncle Art. They tell me those snow slides churn over and over. Nobody knows how many times Uncle Art was at the bottom of the pile and pushed back to the top. It was just a miracle that he ended up at the top of the heap so somebody could find his body. This Bowman Gulch that you mentioned, could your uncle have been going through it to get to some other place, I asked? Nope, Bowman Gulch dead ends on the side of New York Mountain, Bill answered. Maybe he was using the gulch to get up on the mountain? Uncle Art knew those mountains. He never would have gone through the gulch with the danger of snowslides when he could have followed a hogback. Besides, if he just wanted to get up into the mountain, he would have started from the town of Fulford, which is on the opposite side of New York Mountain. No, Uncle Art headed straight into the gulch, knowing a snowslide might kill him. Didn't anybody ever go back into Bowman Gulch to look for this outcrop, I asked? You're damned right they did, Bill exclaimed. I even went up there and looked for it myself. Oh gosh, that's rough country up there. There's down timber and cliffs and rock slides. Really a booger. How long is the gulch, I asked. Oh, let me see. The gulch isn't very big. I'd say that it isn't a mile long and not more than a quarter-mile wide. It's shaped like a big V. The sides are steep and covered with loose rock where snowslides haven't swept everything clean. If the gulch is less than a mile long, why hasn't someone found this outcrop of gold? Well, the way I figure it, one slide uncovers the vein, and the next covers it back up. Maybe it has been uncovered a dozen times since Uncle Art was killed, but nobody happened to be around then. In fact, I haven't heard of anybody going into that country for a long time. What would be the best way to get into Bowman's Gulch, Bill? Well, there are a couple of ways to get there. You could go up to Fulford. It's just about a ghost town now. Hike over the top of New York Mountain and drop right down into the gulch. An easier way would be to turn off Highway 24 at Avon and follow a gravel road as far as you could up Westlake Creek. I don't know how far that road goes now, but I imagine you wouldn't have to walk over 3 or 4 miles. She's rough country, though. Bill reached up on a shelf and pulled down a bundle of maps. Extricating one from the bundle, he pointed with the stem of his pipe to a short, wiggly line that branched off of a longer line marked Westlake Creek. Right there is Bowman's Gulch. You couldn't miss it, he said. That is the story of the Lost Slate Mine, the most found gold mine in the West. Like most lost mine stories, it started out with vague and inaccurate directions, but it ended up by pinpointing the exact location of the short canyon where a cache of nuggets and a fabulous vein of gold wait to be rediscovered. If the last snowslide or the last flash flood uncovered either the cache or the vein, the next person into that canyon will be rich, if he can get out alive. So that's it for this episode from Frontier Times Magazine, all the way back in 1963. To this day, no one has found this gold vein near New York Mountain in Colorado. I have tried to pinpoint the location of Bowman Gulch, based on the location described in this story. If that's where it is, then the easiest way to get there might be to follow West Lake Creek Trail. This is actually a logging or fire road, and it's possible that it's the same road described by Bill Kleckner in this story. Bowman's Gulch also doesn't appear to be far from the starting points of the New York Mountain Trail, although it's unclear how difficult it would be to reach the gulch from that point. The New York Mountain Trail goes up the west side of New York Mountain, near Fulford, and the story says the gulch is on the other side of the mountain from Fulford. Of course, it's worth remembering that many people have died trying to find this gold, particularly in the winter due to avalanches, so think about that before you set out to find it. This channel is called Unworthy History because we talk about actual history that is now deemed unworthy to show on history channels on TV. Those channels only find one lost treasure worth looking for, and that is the treasure on Oak Island. They have been looking for the Oak Island treasure for 11 seasons and still haven't found it. Here on this recurring series called Lost Gold on Unworthy History, we will cover the historical accounts of many lost mines that are beneath the dignity of other history channels to cover. If you're able to and would like to support the mission of this channel, then consider becoming a Patreon member. Patreon members will have their chosen name displayed at the end of each episode. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.